Hello everyone, I'm Walter Poleman from the Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources at the University of Vermont, and it's a spectacular fall day here in the Champlain Valley, and I'm on the location of one of our most important partners for the Rubenstein School, and that is Shelburne Farms. We're on this beautiful 1,400-acre agricultural landscape, and today we're going to be exploring the concept of farmscape ecology, really, and that is how humans interact with this landscape through time to do all sorts of things, including deriving great local food, forest products, and perhaps most importantly, it's a place of education for sustainability.
Hello, Chris Brooks here with the Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources, and I'm here today at just an amazingly beautiful spot. We're at Shelburne Farms. It's about a 20-minute drive south of UVM's campus, and I'm joined today by Sam Dixon, who is the dairy farm manager here at Shelburne Farms. So Sam, I wonder if you could start by just giving us some background information about the dairy operation here in terms of the size of your herd, your grazing and milking practices, and just your general philosophy about managing a dairy operation like this.
Yeah, Shelburne Farms dairy, we milk about 120 purebred registered brown Swiss cows. This herd was started back in 1950 by Derek Webb. It's been a long established purebred registered herd of brown Swiss. We started making cheese from the milk of the cows in 1983, I believe. Actually, when I was a student at UVM, you could buy Shelburne Farms raw milk in cartons in the Grand Union in downtown Burlington. So we've always had sort of this tradition of direct marketing and trying to add value to the milk that the cows produce. Currently, we're making about 170,000 pounds of cheese a year from the milk produced by these cows. We're what's called a grass-based dairy. We focus our management on grazing and getting the cows out as much as possible to graze so they can derive as much of their nutrition from pasture as possible. We have long winters in Vermont, so we do have to barn animals up, and this time of year we're switching over to more of a winter feeding program where we feed round bale silage, dry hay, and then supplement that with grain for their winter feeding.
Great. So I'm interested in nutrient planning here on the farm. We know that nutrient pollution, primarily phosphorus, is driving impairment of water quality in Lake Champlain. And here at Shelburne Farms, you're right on the lake. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you plan to manage nutrients and manage all of the manure produced by your herd.
Sure. We are right on the lake, and we do have about 2 miles of lakefront. The primary way we're trying to manage the land and the cows and the manure is by our all-grass grazing program. The whole farm is in sod, either permanent hay or permanent pasture. We're not doing any corn or any row crops, and that's really one of the primary sources of non-point source pollution going into Lake Champlain is from erosion from field crops. And so by having the whole farm in a sod, we're really eliminating that source of pollution. But we also, the cows are pooping, and when they do go out and graze, and then we have the manure from the barn that we spread, and we just try to manage those nutrients to feed back onto the soil. We have a nutrient management plan whereby we plan out where we're spreading all the manure. We record that. We take manure samples. We also take soil samples every 3 years so that we're making sure not to put too much manure on certain fields, and we can spread it around. We also have a buffer area around the lake where we don't graze any animals and we don't spread any manure. We follow all of the best management practices that you'd find in the state regulations or in Farm Service Agency type recommendations, with setbacks from water. Cows are fenced out of streams and brooks, and then we try to manage where the manure is spread, and also the timing of the spreading is really important. We have a large manure storage that gives us about 7 months of storage, so we don't have to spread through the winter. We can We can store the manure. There is actually a winter spreading ban in Vermont that prohibits you from spreading manure from December 15th to April 1st. So we've got actually more flexibility because of our large manure storage. And that allows us to target those manure spreadings when they're going to do the most good. After first cutting, after second cutting and third cutting, we've really tried to, over the past few years, adopt a philosophy of spreading less more often. Instead of like having a huge spreading event in the spring and a huge spreading event in the fall, trying to get less manure out more often through the season where the plants have an opportunity to take it up and use it as fertilizer. I really see this as an area where good environmental practices and good economics come together. If we're spreading a lot of manure and a lot of it's running off and a lot of it's ending up in the lake, not only are we creating an environmental problem and polluting the lake, but to me, we're also wasting money. Those are nutrients we want to capture and recycle here on the farm. I don't want to see them running off because that's fertilizer that I want to capture and reuse and keep cycling on the farm.
Sure. So Sam, I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about nutrient management. You've got rotational grazing practices going on across the farm. You're maintaining buffers in spots away from the lake. Can you talk a little bit about managing runoff right here in the barnyard? You've got animals in the barn, you've got a manure pit, and just explain how you're trying to use sort of ecological processes to limit nutrients from getting in the lake.
Yeah, we've done a bunch of different, I guess, and you might call it engineering or landscaping to sort of try to control the runoff that's coming from this site. We have a lot of animals outside, but we also barn up in the winter, and we have animals in barns and around barns, and there's all the runoff that's coming just from this dairy site. And so we really need to look at that and how we're managing that. The first thing that we've got is we put in a ditch that sort of catches all of the runoff from this site. It's a shallow slope ditch with a wide bottom that very much slows the water runoff. As it's running off this site, it hits that ditch, and then it runs very slowly through that ditch and picks up all the nutrients coming off of the dairy site, and then it goes actually into a constructed wetland. We put believe it's called a subsurface flow gravel filter wetland, where we actually engineered a wetland and planted certain plants and have a series of ponds that the water flows through just to kind of slow it down, gives these plants that have the ability to take up a lot of nutrients a chance to sort of take as many of those nutrients out of the water that's coming off the dairy site. And then from there, it actually goes into a natural wetland. We call it elm swamp. And as it sort of meanders through this large swamp, and then it outlets in the lake. And it's really important for us to manage this runoff, because not only would it be bad to pollute the lake, but we have had in the past a lot of summer camps, and this all outlets right at the beach where the summer camps swim. So we're really trying to watch this runoff and control it. And we test on a weekly basis the water that's flowing through this system, and we have not exceeded state or federal standards for the last memory that I can have. It's been a very effective natural system that's cleaning those nutrients as the water is flowing to the lake. But the general principle is just to slow it down and run it through plants. And that'll do a lot to clean the water.
So lots of really directed steps you're taking to manage nutrients. I'd like for you to talk a little bit more broadly about other strategies in terms of preserving ecological values across the farmscape here. So you've got animals grazing out in the fields, and this is also providing important wildlife habitat. Can you talk a little bit about how you manage to protect areas for, say, grassland nesting birds?
Absolutely. I feel it's really important to understand ecosystems and how they work and natural cycles, and use those to inform our farming practices. So understanding soil ecology, the water cycle, understanding how plants grow, the interaction of plants and animals, and all of those to enhance our management. We also are managing a landscape with a lot of different stakeholders here, one of which is the wildlife that that inhabits the farm with us. So we maintain a wide variety of different habitats. There's a lot of field edges and transition zones. The elm swamp is certainly a rich and diverse habitat, but I also learned about these transition zones. We have an invasive species here called buckthorn, which it's really bad. Anytime you don't mow anything, you get this buckthorn moving in field edges. But I also learned that that's an excellent habitat for rabbits. And then the rabbits serve as a prey species for bobcats. So we actually have a really healthy bobcat population on the farm because of this wide variety of different habitats we have in the landscape. One of the most rewarding and interesting things I've been involved with in the past, I think this was the 19th field season of the grassland bird study, where initially we were just measuring the life cycle of the bobolink and the savanna sparrow when they came back, and the effects of haying on those populations. And then over time, as we learn more about it, the researchers developed some recommendations on how we might alter our cutting practices to accommodate the life cycle of these grassland birds, and we've adopted a lot of those strategies into our grassland management. One is what's called an early cut, late cut. So we want to try to get out as early as possible for the first cut when the hay is of the highest quality for the dairy cows, and that's also before the birds have really started arriving. They're migratory birds. The bobolink in particular fly a long way. They come all the way from Argentina, and they begin to arrive in about middle May and start setting up their nesting sites. So if we can get out and take the hay early, that's before they've really started their life cycle. And then if we wait 60 days, 65 days, then that gives the birds a chance to set their nests up, lay their eggs, fledge their young, and go through their life cycle. And then we take that next cutting. The feed isn't really high enough quality for the dairy cows, but it's certainly adequate for heifers and dry cows. And we also have a sheep flock on the farm and some beef cows on the farm. So we're able to use it in other parts of the operation. So that's one strategy. The next strategy is a much more traditional haying strategy. When the old timers used to not start haying until the 4th of July. We have some land that we wait until July before we cut, and we've tried to plant certain grasses on those fields that are later maturing, so there's still some feed quality coming off of those fields, and we can feed dry cows and larger heifers and beef cows with that feed. And so we just wait until July, and that gives the birds a chance to come in and set up their nests and go through their life cycle and fledge their young, and gives them an opportunity there. The next strategy we use is just waiting until August. There's very little feed quality coming off of those fields. We then are able to use that material for bedding in our barn. So we've integrated that into our farming operation. The one thing that we've learned about that is it's very important to remove that material from the fields for the next season. So what attracts the birds to a field when they're migrating back is green grass. So if you just mow those fields and leave the grass, it tends to suppress the grass growth the next spring, so they're less attractive to the birds. By removing that, we're enhancing the habitat for the next year. And we are able to use that as bedding in the winter. And we have what's called a bedded pack for our heifers and sheep, where we basically just keep a deep organic matter bedding and then dig that out. And this time of year we're getting ready to start spreading that stuff back on the fields for the crop for next year. We've also tried to manage some of our pastures for the grassland birds too, letting some of the pastures get very mature before we're turning livestock in, and that works for some older dry cows in the summer.
Great. Sam, it's great to get your perspective and learn about the various ways that you are managing this working landscape here at Shelburne Farms. Thanks for chatting with us today.
Yeah, sure, no problem. My pleasure.
Hi everybody, I'm Walter Poleman from the Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources at UVM. We're here in the Woodlands at Shelburne Farms with Dana Bishop. And Dana is the Natural Resources and Woodland Manager for the farm, and she's going to share with us a little bit today about really what's involved with managing the woodlands in here and how does it integrate with the whole farmscape ecology of this place and really their mission of education for sustainability. So Dana, can you tell us a little bit about the woodlands here at Shelburne Farms?
Sure. The woodlands at Shelburne Farms, there's about 400 acres, 100 acres of pine plantations that were intentionally planted, and about 300 acres of mixed hardwood. Some is more sugar maple dominated, and then there's kind of a ash, hickory, oak dominated. Different kind of forest stands highlight different species. It's managed for various things like recreation, obviously lots of walkers and kids, and there's a sugar bush, so one forest stand is definitely managed for sugar maples, and then the other forest stands are just managed for wildlife, and every forest stand presents a different kind of unique challenges, and we're managing for different aspects. One of our big challenges is regeneration, so that's a constant experiment trying to get new trees growing in each forest stand.
And Shelburne Farms has a special mission, and it's a multifaceted mission that's everything from historic preservation to educating about the future. How does those factors weave into your forest management concerns and strategies?
So one big project for the forest management is maintaining the historic landscape that was planned by Edward Olmsted. It's just managed so that, you know, if you stand in this location, you're looking through that forest stand and that forest stand, and it frames kind of a certain photo. It's very intentional, very beautiful, but we have these forest stands, lots of these pine plantations that really frame the landscape. The tricky part is getting those pine plantations to regenerate as pine, or we often need to intentionally plant them as pine because the regeneration doesn't want to happen naturally. It's a very planned landscape, and it's also a historic landscape, so we want to keep it looking the way it is looking instead of maybe the way it wants to succeed into a different species assemblage. And so we're working really hard to maintain the historic landscape, which is sometimes not what it wants to naturally be. So it's a challenge, but it's also rewarding because we want to keep this beautiful landscape planned as it was meant to be.
Well, it certainly is a stunning place. When people enter Shelburne Farms for the first time, you know, seeing the trees and planted in specific patterns on the landscape, and then of course the buildings that are interspersed among that, yeah. The agricultural fields. As you mentioned, this was planned by Frederick Law Olmsted back in the 1880s together with the Webb family. I've heard even that Gifford Pinchot was involved, the father of American forestry.
Yes, yeah. He was. He was involved with, like I said, with these plantations that were intentionally planted on these high kind of knolls that weren't good for grazing. So he's definitely, some of these trees were probably planted by Pinchot. So whenever we do a harvest, you always kind of wonder if that was the one that was planted by him or not.
Right, and what species might you be talking about that are not necessarily native to this landscape but were part of the planting pattern?
The pine plantations, often there's a lot of these knolls that have these pines on them it's a mixture of pines, like some spruce trees, and now there's like some maples and some ash growing in there as well, some oak, but it was mostly dominated, it was intentionally planted with white pine.
All right, I know that Shelburne Farms is interested in wildlife habitat, for instance, as well, not only on the agricultural fields, you know, where they're managing for things like grassland birds at the same time they're growing hay for the cows. What approach do you take here in the woodlands as it relates to habitat for wildlife?
So when we do kind of our forest assessments and look at our forest stands, some of the things we're looking for wildlife habitat is that there's snags, dead snags, and we want those snags to be maybe 20 inches in diameter. So we want big, nice, dead trees for birds and bugs and everything. And then we look for down woody debris. We don't want our forest floor to necessarily be cleaned up. We want there to be down woody debris. And then from a kind of a bigger picture, we're looking at how the forest stands are connected, because it's the Champlain Valley in general is a very fragmented landscape. And so we're looking at, you know, if an animal is in this forest stand, how does it get to the next place? And one project involved planting some corridors to let the animals kind of go from place to place, from forest stand to forest stand, and be undercover and feel safe moving. Often these corridors start out as like shrubby native shrubs, and then they usually transition into buckthorn, which is not a native species, but it does provide that structural habitat that animals want, that cover to go from place to place.
Yeah, it's great. You're managing for history, you're managing for wildlife, but I know traditionally forest management is also about timber products. And I'm wondering, what's the Shelburne Farms approach to that? Is there a market for wood that's being grown here?
Yeah.
And how do you work with that?
Yeah, so the forest stands at Shelburne Farms are, in the forest management plan, are divided into smaller forest stands to manage. So maybe, anywhere from 5 to 15 acres is each kind of management unit or forest stand. And so then every year we kind of think about what products we need from our woods, and usually those products are firewood, lumber, and then also habitat. So we harvest the logs, the trees, cut them into logs, and then we have a portable mill come and mill the lumber. And then we have a relationship with the Treehouse Hardwoods and Mill Shop. I think they're called Treehouse Hardwoods and Mill Shop. They're a retail lumber store. They have customers coming in for countertops, and they do some milling, or they can just buy the lumber and have someone else process it for them. And they say kind of what species they're selling and what dimensions they want us to cut them to, and then they tell us whether they want us to keep the bark on the edges or whether they want us to clean it up, and they would use it for counters, or if they're going to use it for sell it as big slabs. We also have a really good relationship with a log buyer, and they say, okay, this log you would make more if you use it as firewood than if you sell it to us, so you're going to keep this log. And then that log that's firewood is usually one that has lots of character with lots of knots and that kind of thing. And so then we can then decide, well, is this a maple that has a lot of character that's worth more as firewood? And if it is, then we can usually sell it to the treehouse, and then we make more than firewood value for that. So we have lots of different options, and it never goes to waste, and usually we can get pretty good money for the different products, as long as we keep our harvest relatively small. Mm-hmm. If we go too big, then the treehouse can't use it. We'll make too many logs that are low quality that the log buyer doesn't want, and then we get too much firewood. So we have to keep it all scaled to our needs so that we can use it most efficiently.
Great. You use this word character in describing wood. What do you mean by that?
So the log buyer wants like super perfect, relatively generic type logs for their markets. And then the treehouse is looking for ones that maybe have lots of like branches that came off of the log, and so you get this really cool kind of knots in the log, and maybe a lot of heartwood, a lot of that dark character heartwood. And so it's basically a log that isn't, high value, generic, beautiful for a clear white countertop or something like that, but then it has a lot of unique character for furniture making and that kind of thing.
Sure. So one person's defect is another person's character.
Exactly. So you just have to find the right person.
Yeah, and I know working with Beacon Parsons, who have a wood shop here, have mm-hmm. really explored this terrain of building furniture with character, or mm-hmm. even furniture with a sense of place.
Yes.
I was in their shop the other day, and they had building something that had tap holes and sugar maple,
yep.
and it was just this beautiful piece of furniture.
Yeah, exactly.
So, we're standing in this forest here where there's just beautiful sugar maples in here. Mm-hmm. There are towering sugar maples, straight boles. There's a lot of sugar maple regeneration in here. Now, a number of UVM students, their introduction to this place is actually in the winter. Mm-hmm. And as winter is turning to spring, down at your sugar house, down mm-hmm. off the Market Garden there.
Yeah.
What an exciting place, and what a great building. Can you tell us a little bit about the sugaring operation and how you manage for maple syrup here?
Sure.
At Farms?
So the sugaring operation has kind of snowballed over the years, and that's just, I think, the nature of sugaring. You just want more and more, and you see how you could have more and more. So it's kind of gone from an educational operation with buckets and a few lines on gravity to more of a production operation. So we have about 2,300 taps now, which is probably all we need in order to supply syrup for the Welcome Center and Catalog and the Inn. So we have a sugar bush that we manage for sugar maples, but we also are looking to maintain some diversity there. We did a harvest this last winter in the sugar bush and took out some really big red oaks, hoping to make some holes in the canopy to get some sunlight to the forest floor and get those sugar maples regenerating. But at the same time, kind of keeping some diversity there, which whenever you keep diversity, from a sugar bush standpoint, you're always saying, well, that's taking sunlight and nutrients from the sugar maples, but you also have to look into the future and think you don't want just a monoculture forest stand. And then for sugaring, We could have, this whole forest here tapped, but we just want to keep it to, what the farm needs. Kind of keeping, like we keep our forest stands to harvest that we need. We keep our sugar bush to a size that's just what the farm really needs.
Well, I know that the sugaring operation certainly aligns with Shelburne Farms' mission of education. And I know that from bringing many UVM students here over the years. And I just wondered, any other aspects that your job as essentially the forester here, and how that links to the farm's mission of education for a sustainable future?
Yeah, so every forest stand really presents a really unique challenge and an experiment to try to figure out how to manage it and how to steward it for exactly what we want at Shelburne Farms. And we also have to listen to that forest stand to let it tell us what it wants to be. So the sugar bush has talked to us and said, definitely, it's obviously a sugar bush. It makes sense for its location and its forest composition. And then there's other ones that speak to more of like a red oak system. And then we think about how we're going to manage that. And then there's other areas that we could manage for sugar bush, but we want to keep it as a place for recreation. Or there's kind of a different forest stand that's more of an educational sugar bush with buckets and lines on gravity. So instead of kind of trying to go all in on the sugaring, we need to kind of make sure we're managing for education as well. That provides just as much value as a production sugar bush. And the wildlife, which is extremely valuable for everyone to see, a fox running through or a bobcat running through. We need to make sure we maintain that habitat because that's what the forests are providing.
What would you say are the challenges that the forest is facing here at Shelburne Farms, and therefore your challenge as a natural resource manager?
I think that the challenges that the forests have right now is that they are a beautiful forest. You look around and you see these beautiful maples. And then you see these small kind of maple seedlings growing. But often these seedlings are eaten by deer, or they don't really get the nutrients they need because of the worms in the soil. So regeneration to me is one of the biggest challenges. Like we have a forest stand right now, forest stands that are beautiful, but what's coming next? And that's not always clear. And so we do harvest in terms of kind of an experimental approach. Like we harvested from one red oak forest stand where there was no regeneration. The soil was just bare, no leaves, nothing. And we said, okay, what if we get sunlight to the forest floor? What happens? And we did that and nothing happened. So now we're like, okay, what's next? We need to plant this, or what are we going to do? And so it's a constant challenge and an experiment for each forest stand. And I think, along with climate change and just thinking, okay, what kind of forest composition is going to exist in the future? So we want to be managing for, oak or even black walnut, or species that really kind of like the warmer weather. And maples probably aren't the ones that love the warmer weather. So just kind of thinking about the future forest composition and also the regeneration, which they kind of go hand in hand.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess my last question is what part of your job brings you the most joy and satisfaction?
Sugaring.
You don't have to wait long for that.
It's just so, like I said, for the forest management and the harvest, it's just such a head scratcher. Like, why are the trees not growing? How are we going to get them to grow? What is this going to look like next? But for sugaring, you just are making syrup, and it's delicious and it's straightforward. It's complicated and tricky sometimes, but it ultimately you get this beautiful crop, and so that's what makes it all worthwhile.
And you don't have to wait for 10, 20 years
exactly.
to see the fruits of your labor.
Yeah, exactly.
You can
I know.
be putting it on your pancakes a little while later, or seeing the joy in people's faces when they taste it.
Yeah, it's very rewarding.
Well, this has been really informative. Thank you so much,
Sure.
Dana. And Dana Bishop, again, is the Woodlands and Natural Resource Manager here at Shelburne Farms. We're down here in the farm barn now, just below the Woodlands, and normally we think about it storing agricultural products, but here is just a fantastic spot to see where the wood that has been harvested and milled is stored at Shelburne Farms. Dana, I just love this place. If you could show us around a little bit at some of the species that's stacked here and some of the character of the different pieces of wood, that would be fabulous. Like, for instance, right over here, what species is this, and what's going on with this stacking pattern?
This is a cherry tree, and we call this a flitch when you stack it all together, kind of just how the tree was standing. We mill it like that. Then you can use it with the we call this a live edge. You can use the lumber with the live edge for that kind of character. Or if you want to mill that live edge off, you can take it off and use it just as a board. But it just kind of leaves your option open and you're not wasting anything. And then you can see this board right here has this really interesting kind of seam in it. I mean, obviously that's a defect, but someone might really think that looks cool and they could fill it with epoxy and still use it for a table. And it kind of just highlights the fact that this is was a living thing. And then we have other species in here. Over here, we have some taphole maple with a lot of character. You can see right here, here's a taphole. And then when you get the taphole, this is where obviously the hole was, and then the tree heals and you get a little kind of diamond-shaped scar around it. And here you have some more tapholes, and then a lot of character. So that's another kind of defective piece of wood that can then be used for more character type wood program.
Yeah. Boy, I could see somebody who's really into maple sugaring loving to have a table made out of a tree with a taphole in it as a conversation piece, among other things.
Exactly, yeah.
So that's wonderful. So this seems like it's a microcosm of the forest in some ways in terms of the species and their value and the different character and history that's embedded in them. What a fantastic spot. Thanks so much, Dana.
Yeah, no problem.
Our exploration of Shelburne Farms has now taken us to really the heart of the operation here, and I think of that as the children's farmyard. And the farm barn is a place where all the educational activities are really sort of generated and radiate out into the landscape. And we're really lucky to have with us today the school programs coordinator for Shelburne Farms. It's Courtney Mulcahy. Welcome, Courtney. Thanks for being with us. Can you tell us a little bit about your job in this place?
Yeah, well, it sounds like you've had a fun day. And education is the thing that makes the implicit explicit. So all of the work that we're doing here on the farm, our education programs help to make that more visible. So here in the children's farmyard, people connect with their food and their fiber through meeting some animals, maybe going up and brushing a donkey, or getting to spin some rabbit wool into yarn and make a bracelet. So all of our programs are really there to help people understand and make those connections and foster that curiosity to deepen their learning and understandings of these topics that are at play all over the farm.
Earlier today, we were meeting with Sam Dixon down at the dairy, and I wonder how you use the dairy in your programs.
So the dairy especially is one, because also being close to the lake, we think a lot about the nutrients and the nutrient cycle and what's happening with students. So making sure that we are being good stewards of the lake as well, and tracking the nutrient cycle from the dairy all the way down to the lake is one thing that we'll do. We'll also think about the cows and how they're breaking down with the bacteria, the hay that they're eating, and how that bacteria breaks down, and then what happens to it, and how that might turn into cheese later on.
Well, how about the Woodlands? We were up with Dana Bishop looking at the forests of Shelburne Farms. Is there ways that you weave those into your programs as well?
Well, one of our favorite things to do with younger students is to go and just find out who even lives in the forest, who and what lives there. So we like to roll over logs and look at the ecosystem, the little ecosystems that are happening under there. So thinking about decomposers or maybe salamanders and those macroinvertebrates that we would find under logs and that sort of thing, and what role they play in a forest. We also like to use the forest to think about maple sugaring, one of our favorite and most delicious programs, and how we're caring for the forest and how the ecology of the forest affects the final product of the syrup.
Sounds good. Hey, Courtney, what's your favorite program here at Shelburne Farms?
So my favorite programs are the ones where I get to eat something, where we get to go into the garden and pull out some food right from the garden or harvest it right there and then make something together as a group. A couple of years ago, we also did a program with Shelburne Community School where they were a salsa challenge, where they had to pick some ingredients, come up with their own salsa that they then branded and marketed within their classroom, and came up, and they were so excited to try all these new different ingredients to put into their salsa, things that they would have never tried before. I find that with kids often. When they pick it right out of the garden and they harvest it themselves, there's nothing better, and they will eat things that you never thought they would touch before. So
Wonderful, Courtney. It's clear you really love your job here at Shelburne Farms. And I'm a
really
little
love my
envious of what you do and this beautiful place you get to work in. And the fact that you're working with the future as well,
Oh,
with
yeah.
all the people that come through here. So
Yep.
thanks so much for everything you're doing.
Thanks.